I'm Grant Sims. Here we farm at Pinegrove, which is northern Victoria. I'm sixth generation on the farm. We do about 8,500 acres of cropping. And part of that system we implement as part of our cropping rotation large areas of multi-species cover crops which we integrate livestock on. So the reason we got into multi-species cropping, we're essentially just trying to mimic nature and grow more diversity. We just sort of stumbled across it and we just sort of expanded on it over the years, but we found wherever we had diversity, we had less insect pressure, we had less disease pressure. We tend to be able to grow more biomass with less inputs as well. We don't have to keep feeding it all the time with nitrogen, phosphorus, all these things, because we've got a lot of plants in here that'll do it for us. When we look at, especially in cropping systems, if we've got soils with problems, whether it be soil structure or weeds, one way we fix them as farmers is we go out with a checkbook and we spend a lot of money. We're ripping or we're liming and we're doing all these things to improve that soil. And we found with getting diversity in, a diversity of roots, diversity above ground and below ground, we can repair these soils and improve the soil structure and the function of the soil while making money grazing them. One of my first jobs back on the farm here was boom spray operator. You know, we grew a lot of wheat and canola and all monoculture crops. And I remember back then everywhere you'd have rhizoctonia patches, yellow leaf spot, all these diseases. Then we started getting rust and all these things that the old man said, you know, 20 years ago they never sprayed for rust, they never sprayed for this and that, and now it's part of the system. We just got to put a fungicide in here to address that. And I was seeing more and more of these symptoms appear, and it just didn't gel with me that we're now having to use more sides to treat these symptoms, and then next year we're back out here doing it again. So we started looking at what's causing these things, and when we address them, you know, adding diversity and getting more minerals and nutrients like nutrition right, a lot of these symptoms that we saw in our wheat crops started disappearing. Most symptoms and issues we have in the soil that we find in cropping systems, or any system for that matter, come down to a lack of diversity. We've lost so much diversity of plant species within our environment. You know, if we go back 100, 200 years and looked at the native pastures, there'd be hundreds, if not thousands, of different species of grasses and legumes and things like that, and that's how the soil functioned. The more diversity we can get in, the better our soils will get. We're just mimicking nature and working with the soil instead of trying to manipulate it. Cover crops, when we're using them in our cropping system, you know, we can fix a lot of nitrogen and we see a massive reduction in disease and insect pressure going forward into crops. So then when we go back into crops, you know, our input costs, you know, we could be using 20% of the nitrogen we would have otherwise used. 30 to 40 kilos of urea on a year versus, you know, up to 200 to 300 kilos that people are now using. Because nitrogen is such a huge expense in all cropping, and phosphorus, and it's a thing that we buy that we can make ourselves if we've got, you know, mineralisation and we've got legumes and things like that in the system. So it's all about building that system that is what nature intended to do. You know, we've got to be careful because we still want to get our yields and be profitable. So it's about weaning off some of those things while building those systems, and that's the challenging and fun part, I suppose. We're pretty low rainfall here. Our average rainfall is about 400 mils a year, and we could quite often just get 200 mils for the growing season. So for us to be profitable and grow crops, we have to really focus on our soil, because that's where it all starts. We've measured this in our journey along the way with moisture probes, but we want to make sure our water infiltration is always improving, our water holding capacity is improving, you know, things like that, so we can be more efficient with the rainfall that we do get. Cover crops are a great way to sort of tick those boxes and help us address those problems. I think most times as farmers we're always looking at the area we farm two-dimensionally, length by width, and what we grow above the ground, but if we start thinking it in a third dimension, adding depth to that and focusing on growing roots. Look at the bloody root systems on that, eh? By getting diversity of roots in, we can get into large areas. That's how we build soils. So essentially why we got into multi-species covers, we're trying to restore soils or regenerate them, build them back up while growing large amounts of high quality feed and making money grazing them with cattle.